I think that when it comes down to horror films of the 2020s decade so far, I really do think that there have been some good, if not some truly great horror films out there, and there will be, by the way, a special video coming on October 30th about those films, so stay tuned for that one. However, in the meantime, it is time for me to talk about the movies that, let's just say, that are unfortunately, to say at least, are on the opposite side of that coin. For today's video, this was originally going to be a top 5, but because I have been having such a great time with Halloween Horror Movies 2025, this top 5 will instead be a top 10, and this top 10 is my top 10 worst horror films of this current decade so far. Before I continue on and talk about my worst horror films of this decade so far, of course, gotta talk about the guidelines. I have not seen every single horror film that came out this decade, and there are some films out there that I know you may imagine, hey, how come this one isn't on there? Either A, I didn't see that horror film, or B, I probably didn't dislike it as much as you did, hence why it might not be on this list. This is my list, my subjective list of the films that I thought were just an absolute disgrace to the genre. At this point, I usually talk about dishonorable mentions, but because this is already a top 10 for the first time, and because I've been rambling on for as long as I have, no dishonorable mentions this time around, as I just want to get right into this list. Let's rip off the band-aid, get into the pain, and get into my top 10 worst horror films of this decade so far, starting off with number 10. Let's get it on. Kicking things off at my number 10 spot is a movie that was originally much higher on this list, but because of other films coming out of this decade, it surprisingly moved this movie down all the way to number 10, and that is The Forever Purge. The other films on this list I actually hated more than The Forever Purge, and that is saying something because I hated this movie. If you guys out there happen to enjoy these movies, you know what? More power to you. I actually know somebody that loved these movies. I wish I was in the same boat because I find the Purge movies to be the most annoying and the most obnoxious films that, sure, while they have a very interesting concept, the execution of those said concepts, however, couldn't have been any more of a misfire than these movies already have. It doesn't even feel like a Purge movie. It just feels like a typical generic action film with very one-dimensional writing and with characters once again making some stupid as hell decisions throughout this whole film. I have been praying that this has been the last Purge movie, and even though they're supposed to make more, it looks like this franchise is dead, and I have 2 words to say about that. Thank God. Coming on to my number 9 spot, I have Firestarter. Firestarter is one of those horror films that's trying to do a billion different things, and yet it fails at doing every single one of those things. At one point, Firestarter tries to be an action film. It tries and it fails. It tries to be a mystery film at one point. It tries, it fails. It tries to be a drama film. Guess what? It fails. It even tries to be a family film at one point, and guess what? You guessed it, it fails. The most important thing that it's trying to do, and that is being a horror film, and guess what? You're right. It fails. Now, I can imagine that it's gotta be very exciting to be in a Stephen King adaptation, to which I have to admit, I have not read the book, nor have I seen the Drew Barrymore film that came out a couple of decades ago. But here's the thing, guys. It seriously cannot be as bad, nor worse. Firestarter, more like misfire on every level. On to my number 8 spot, I have Brahms the Boy 2. Why was this movie made? It's not like that people were begging and they were just on their knees saying, man, you gotta make a sequel to The Boy. A January horror film, by the way. Now, I will admit, I actually think that the first Boy, which came out, I think this was in 2016, I thought that was a pretty decent horror film. It wasn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but for a horror film that was released in January, which has been known as the dumping ground for horror films, that movie was actually pretty decent and it had a great twist ending. Way to completely slap a decent horror film in the face just for the sake of making a sequel. The Boy is a film that does not at any certain point even warrant a sequel, and you know what's even worse? Just remember this. This movie actually tries to set up for a third film. How about no? You know, everybody, I am really excited for the day that we actually get a great Resident Evil film. However, that day has yet to come, especially for the film adaptation that came out 4 years ago with Welcome to Raccoon City. Now, before I continue on, I have to admit this. There were at least 3 things I think they actually got right with this movie. Kayla Scodero, I think that's how you pronounce her name, who played Claire Redfield, and she was great. She was actually the best, with the movie. The production design, especially when it came down to the Spencer Mansion. The production design of that house was genuinely great, and there was actually one scene of the film that I thought, you know what? That is as close to Resident Evil that we have gotten. Every single time I've seen one of these Resident Evil films, especially Welcome to Raccoon City, I just keep seeing a director make a film when that director doesn't understand what makes Resident Evil such a thrilling game, but such a scary game at its center. I seriously look forward to the day when I come out of theaters and I praise a great Resident Evil film, to which, you know what, I have optimism for Zach Cregger's next year's Resident Evil film, because I actually do think that Zach Cregger can deliver us something great, but we'll have to see on that. Unfortunately, and especially with the case with Welcome to Raccoon City, that day has yet to come. My number 6 was the film that kicked off the 2020s in such spectacular fashion, The Grudge. The start of the 2020s decade had the biggest opportunity, especially for horror, to kick things off in the greatest fashion, and what did we get? And it's one of the worst, I don't know if it's a remake or a reboot of The Grudge. This is a movie that from moment one and to the very end that I was bored to tears, to the point where, and I remember this very vividly, throughout this film, I came this close, that close guys, multiple times to passing out, and I had to literally keep wiggling around in my seat just to keep awake. The Grudge, especially when it comes down to scares, has every single scare, or everything that leads up to a scare, every trope that leads to a scare that you can absolutely think of. As far as a kickoff to 2020's horror starts, The Grudge couldn't have been a worse start. I mean, oh my god. Coming on to my number 5 spot, I have Halloween Ends. Halloween 2018 was not only a great retcon for the Halloween franchise, but it once again showed why Michael Myers is such a terrifying force of nature. Halloween Ends takes everything that even Halloween Kills did, and everything that Halloween 2018 did, and it takes the biggest and the most gigantic shit on the Halloween franchise possible. Why focus on a character that had nothing to do with the previous 2 films? The fact that the end of Kills, that they state with each kill that Michael Myers becomes stronger, and for some reason he powers down to some kind of wimp. And then getting on to the last bit, and that's the final fight between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. Michael Myers, the one I know and the one that I have seen, especially in the earlier Halloween films, would have put up a much better fight than that. Like, that was stupid! Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, deserved a much better send-off than that. Coming on to my number 4 spot, The Exorcist Believer. Quite the coincidence that the movie below this one was directed by the same guy who did Halloween Ends. And you wanna know what's so upsetting about this? The fact that this movie is at least double the amount worse than Halloween Ends. The fact that this movie is a direct sequel to my favorite horror film of all time, and the fact that it's not only this generic, but it treats The Exorcist with such shame. I love the fact that Ellen Burstyn came back for 20 minutes. I found that to be just an absolute waste of time, and the fact that this movie, by the way, was supposed to be the first of a trilogy, and that trilogy got canceled after this movie performed so badly. It bombed so bad, not only, it made money at the box office, but the fact that it got such bad reviews, and there was supposed to be a trilogy of films after this, and the fact that trilogy got canceled because of this movie. My pick for my number 3 worst horror film of the decade, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the scariest horror films I have ever seen. And still to this day, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre has one of the greatest endings to a film I have ever seen. But then you follow up that movie with not only one direct sequel, but a do-over for a direct sequel that came out to Netflix. This one, the 2022 movie, is worse than that other movie. This knockoff is supposed to be Leatherface. I can't not talk about this movie without bringing up that stupid bus scene. Touch us and you're canceled, bro. And to make matters even worse, they try and do a Halloween 2018 where they bring back Sally, a character with PTSD, to say, hey, I'm going after Leatherface. That scene where she has a shotgun point blank towards Leatherface, and she has every opportunity to kill that bastard. I have never shouted so much and so loud at a TV screen. And guess what? They try and set up a sequel. No thank you. M. Night Shyamalan is just one of those filmmakers that with every single film that he makes, you're just rolling the dice at this point, because it's either gonna get a film from him that's either really, really good, and by the way, when he makes really good movies, they're good. However, and just sometimes when you roll that dice, you also get a big ass misfire. And without question, Old is his biggest miss since The Last Airbender. As this movie starts off, there is admittedly some intrigue, as I was like, okay, let's see where this movie goes. The more this movie kept going on, whether it was dialogue choices, story choices, or even certain just creative choices that were made in this movie, things not only got weirder and weirder, but things just got worse and worse and worse, to the point where I just couldn't comprehend the decisions that were going on. There are certain bits when it came down to creative decisions, especially when it came down to the body horror aspect, that truly did just flabbergast and they befuddled me. In particular, a scene that involves the birth of a baby. And the fact that there's a character in this movie called Mid-Size Sedan. The twist of this movie was just simply put stupid. It was stupid. Like I mentioned to y'all earlier, when M. Night hits, he absolutely hits. But when he misses, oh my god, that miss is so big and it's so painful that I can't even put into words. Yeah, it's that bad. My number 1 worst horror film of the decade to me is the one that when I saw this movie in 2023, all that I wanted out of this movie was just a dumb, fun slasher film. But all I got out of Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey was an absolute disgrace, a slap in the face, and a kick to the balls. I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine telling him that, yeah, I absolutely hate this movie, and he said, well, what did you expect out of this movie? It looked terrible from the start. While it is a gimmick movie, this movie could have been at least a fun slasher film. You know, the fun type of movie they would kick back with your friends, have a good time with. The 100-acre wood animals turning feral? That could have been so much fun. This movie doesn't take that concept and turn it into the fun slasher film that it could have, especially when you have characters that are literally to the T and are the most definition of cardboard characters possible. And if you're gonna make a slasher film, at least make the kills, you know, fun and memorable. There is not a single kill in this movie that was either fun, memorable, or even gory. I know the film didn't have the biggest budget. I absolutely get that. And the filmmakers had what they could work with. However, when you're given much more money for reshoots, I would have easily have taken that money to make those sequences at least, you know, a bit more fun. This movie can easily, with Idell and the words of my buddy Lucas, it can suck the devil's dick. Oh my god, that felt so good. Holy crap. And that is gonna wrap it up for my top 10 worst horror films of the 2020s decade so far. I hope y'all enjoyed it. If so, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you guys want to see in my previous 2 videos, please click right there or right there. And of course, until my next review or video goes live, I will see you all next time.